Masechet Baba Kama Daf Kaf Gimel. We're talking about the machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish regarding fire. I am responsible if I set fire to something and then the fire spreads and causes damage. I am responsible. But what's the nature of that liability? According to Resh Lakish, it's the same as my ox. Just like an ox, my ox moves on its own, so too fire travels on its own as it spreads. And therefore, I am liable for the fire and with the same parameters that I am liable for my ox that causes damage. Or something else that's my property that causes damage. That's Resh Lakish. According to Rabbi Yochanan, however, he thinks that, oh yes, although it's true that an ox moves on its own and a fire moves on its own, nevertheless, he says, I'm liable to my fire when my fire spreads. That damage is a result of my direct action. It's the same as if I shot an arrow or shot a gun, even though it's an extension and was moving past me. It's not something I can reach. Nevertheless, it's still from my force. It's continuing my force, and therefore the same liability that I would have if I did something with my own force directly, so too I would have that measure of liability for fire that spreads that I caused. All right, so we saw some different sources and proofs yesterday, and now Amar Rava. Rava says I can bring a pasuk and as well as a braita to support Rabbi Yochanan that fire is the same as a person's own force, like an arrow. Kira, dichtiv ki teseh esh, teseh me'asma. Yeshalem ha'mav'ir et ha'be'ira shema'amina isho mishum chisav. He notes that the pasuk seems to say contradictory things. At first it says, if a fire breaks out. So the subject of teseh is the esh, which sounds like the fire is doing something. It's going out on its own. So fire going out on its own, that would make you think that this is something that would be like an ox that moves on its own. But the rest of the pasuk says, Yeshalem hamav'ir, the one who ignited has to pay. Even though I'm not igniting it directly. I mean, if I have a flame and I hold something on top of the flame and burn it, everybody would agree that that's my direct action. But here, even though it's a fire that's spreading throughout someone's field, I'm not going and lighting every grain. Even though it's spreading, it's still, I am called the mav'ir, I am called the igniter, and I have to pay. So we see that something that is burnt because of the spread of the fire that I started, I am called directly responsible for burning it, and therefore we can see that fire is liable as the same as arrows with my direct force, as a result of my direct force and causation. That's the pasuk that Rava has. Matnita detanya, patacha katuv b'niske mamono, v'siyem b'niske gufo, lomar lecha isho mishum chisav. The braita actually just says the same thing regarding an interpretation, but the point is it's not Rava's own reading of the pasuk, but already a braita reads the pasuk in the same way. That pasuk starts off talking about damage caused by my possessions. It's talking about this fire that goes and breaks out. And is spreading as if it's its own thing. But then the continuation of the pasuk talks about me, saying if the thing that I burnt, and so therefore you see that it's equating something that is technically like mammon in the sense that it's moving on its own, but it's treating it as if it's my own force. Remember, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the difference between a fire and an animal is an animal has substance. It's its own thing. It has mass, it has weight. It goes on its own. Whereas fire does not. It's not substantial. It's a form of energy, and so therefore you could call it a continuation of my energy. That when I went and set something on fire, so that energy continues. The same as an arrow, right? I put some kinetic energy into the arrow, and that energy continues and then causes damage far away from me. So that's the same thing as a fire that has its own momentum and movement by propelling itself, but it's not actually a substance. And so here's a braita that reads that into the pasuk as well. Amar Rava, kasha le Abaye. Rava is quoting a question that Abaye had. Lemad amar isho mishum chisav, tamun ba'esh de patara chamana hechi mashkachat la. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that a fire is liable because it's a form of arrows, something that's hidden and then damaged by fire, which the Torah says is I am not liable. So if I see a pile of grain, and I didn't know that you had your fancy car hidden under this big pile of grain, and I say I'm going to go and I'm negligent and I set the grain on fire, and lo and behold, there's a car underneath, and I destroy your car also. The law is I am responsible for the grain because that is noticeable. I'm not responsible for that which is concealed under the grain. Now that is the law regarding esh. But if you say that esh is a form of arrows, then why should that be? If it's my own force, if I shoot an arrow at someone, the whole point of an arrow is going to enter into the person's body and damage what's inside, and anything else that I do with my own body, and punch something, break something, it doesn't matter if it's concealed or revealed, I am liable. According to Resh Lakish, it would make sense, because if it's a form of mammon, all the different kinds of damage have their own quirks, including an ox and a pit. Right, they have different ways in which they are liable and not liable, depending on the scenario and the situation. And so if it's a form of my property, okay, this form of my property regarding esh has this characteristic. So we can say this is the characteristic of this form of property that's mine, that I'm not liable for concealed things. This Lakish should be okay if we say it's mammon. But if we say it's a form of damage that's caused by my person, like arrows, well then there's no such exemption. So v'nichale, now although Abaye had this question, Abaye also resolved his own question. Kegon shenafla deleka leoto haser, v'nafla gader shelo mechamat deleka, ve'elcha ve'hidlika ve'hizika b'chaser acheret, da'atam kalu lechisav. When am I not liable for something concealed? Yeah, you're right. In a regular case, I would be liable. If I just set fire to grain and there was a car under it, I would be liable. But when we say that fire is not liable, it's only in a particular case. For example, if I set fire to this courtyard over here, and then there was a fence separating this courtyard A from courtyard B, such that the fire would not spread. So therefore, at the time I light the fire, I should be liable to everything in courtyard A, revealed and concealed, but not for anything in courtyard B because there's a fence and it would not spread. However, in the meantime, after I lit the fire, that fence separating courtyard A from B fell down. Not because of the fire, for some other reason. A wind came, whatever, and knocked it down. Now the fire spreads to the other field. Well, that is not my direct fault because that's like a case of my arrows were depleted. In other words, I am responsible for my arrows only as far as they can get. If I shoot at something and there's a barricade that would stop the arrows, so I'm responsible for anything that it damages until the barricade. But I assume that it's not going to go past the barricade. If somehow, after I shoot the arrow, the barricade suddenly falls down and now it damages something beyond it, so I would not be as responsible for the things beyond it. So that's what we're talking about. When my fire spreads in courtyard A, I'm responsible for everything there because that's my direct force. But then in the middle, if the fence falls down and it goes to courtyard B, in courtyard B, I would be responsible for revealed things, but not for concealed things. And that's the case it's talking about. But we don't like this answer. If so, then for revealed things also, I should not actually be liable at all for anything in courtyard B. Right? If I shot an arrow at a barricade and the barricade fell away, someone moved it, I would not be responsible at all for things that are beyond the barricade because I was responsible. I made sure that there was a block, something to block it. And so here also, I would be fully responsible for everything in courtyard A, revealed and concealed, and responsible for nothing in courtyard B, because that's not my fault that the fence fell down in the middle. So that can't be the case. אלא למאן דאית לה משום חיסב, אית לה נמי משום ממונו. וכגון שהיה לו לגודרה ולא גדרה, דעתם שורו הוא ולה תפח באפה. Rather, we have to actually go back to the fundamental opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and according to the one who says that a fire is liable as arrows, that's Rabbi Yochanan, he actually says it's also liable as property. We thought Rabbi Yochanan it was either or. Rabbi Yochanan said only as arrows, and the Rish Lakish said only as mammon. But in fact, not true. Everyone agrees that one is liable for fire as mammon, and Rabbi Yochanan is simply adding another level of liability, which is that it's also because of arrows, so that should one be liable in one or the other, Rish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan would say, well, you're liable no matter what, whether it's as arrows or whether it's mammon. And so therefore, in the case, this is fire is also a form of mammon, and as a form of mammon, it can have a peculiar characteristic that makes it not liable for something that would be hidden. So what's a case of fire where I would not be liable for something hidden? Well, we're going to go back to the two-courtyard case. For courtyard A, where I set the fire directly, that's the same as arrow, and there I'm going to be liable for everything revealed and hidden. But in the same case, there was a fence that would have stopped the fire. The fence fell down. It's true, not because of my fault, not my fault. But, for example, I had a chance to fix the fence. The fire was moving along, growing slowly, but I could have went and picked up the fence and stopped the fire from spreading. And so in a case like that, would be equivalent to if I had an ox and it was in danger of escaping, and I didn't stop it by striking it in its face and holding it back, and I let it go. There, I would be liable for damage that the ox did, because I could have stopped it. Even let's say it was not my fault that the fence fell down, but I could have stopped the ox, I would be liable. And so the same thing is here. When I first light the fire, there's a fence. So therefore, I'm only liable fully for courtyard A, where the fire would have gone. Now, the fence goes down, not my fault, but I could have put it up. If I don't put it up and the fire spreads to courtyard B, that's where I'm liable not as arrows, but rather as an ox. And just like with an ox, I am liable. And so too with fire, I would be liable in courtyard B. But that's where the peculiar aspect of fire as mammon kicks in, that I'm liable in courtyard B only for that which is revealed, not for that which is concealed. Okay, now that you tell me that even Rabbi Yochanan, who says that it's because of fire is the same as arrows, he thinks it's also because of mammon, so what would be a difference between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish? And the answer is there's still a few differences, but one simple difference is to make the owner of the fire liable for the 4 different types of damages that he has to pay. If a human being causes damage to another human being directly, then he has to pay not only nezek, but also the other 4 items, pain, medical costs, livelihood, and humiliation. But that's only if a human causes damage with an arrow or directly. And so, but not with property. And therefore, according to the Rabbi Yochanan, if I cause fire to a person, I cause damage to a person by fire, then I am liable to all 5 forms of payment. Whereas according to Rish Lakish, he would say fire is the same as mammon. And just like if my ox went and did harm to someone, I only pay nezek. So too, if my fire spreading causes harm to a person, I am liable only to nezek according to Rish Lakish. We move on to the next part of the Mishnah, al harara mishalem, in the case where my dog goes and gets a piece of pita and as well as a coal, then it has to pay full amount for the pita that it eats, but for the coal that he drops and burns down a pile of grain, I only have to pay half. Now the question is, man hayav, who has to pay this half for the grain? And the answer is Baal Keleb, the owner of the dog. It's his dog that went and ate the pita and moved the coal and put it onto the grain. So the owner of the dog is responsible for both things. Now we ask, wait, how about the owner of the coal? What is he doing leaving a coal exposed in a place where a dog can come get it? So he's also negligent in leaving a dangerous item and not safeguarding it. So the answer is, yeah, you're right, he would be if he left it out. But we're talking about a case, b'sheshimer gachalto. He safeguarded his coal properly, and so therefore he's not responsible. Now we ask, if the owner of the coal safeguarded his coal, then how did the dog get it? And so the answer is b'shehatar. We're talking about a case where the dog dug under a barricade, under a door that the owner of the coal put. The owner of the coal was fine. He put a fence or a door so that nobody would come in and get the coal. But the dog went and dug underneath and was able to get it anyway. And so therefore the owner of the coal is not responsible. He put a sufficient barricade. But the dog managed to get it anyway. Amar Rab Mari bered Rav Kahana zot omeret setam delatot haturot hen esel keleb. Rab Mari, the son of Rav Kahana, says we can learn from this that a standard door can be burrowed under and will not help to guard against a dog. Now, in terms of liability of the coal owner, it's sufficient to put that there. But in terms of the way dogs work, they often do that. They dig under things to get places. And so, as the owner of the dog, I would be liable and the coal owner would not. And lastly, we ask about this. Where did he eat the pita? Right now we're assuming that the coal owner and the grain owner are two different people. So if the dog went and took the pita and the coal from the owner of the coal that area and moved it to the field where the grain is and ate the pita in the field where the grain is, well then that's not the same as the field of the owner of the pita. Now there's a rule regarding shen when eating that it has to be that it goes and eats it in someone else's field, and that's defined in the Midrash that we saw earlier as Reshut HaNizak. I'm only liable to shen if my animal eats food in the field of the owner of the food. It causes the damage in that person's own field. But here that's not true. It's eating the pita in someone else's field, not that of the owner of the pita. So la sericha dachala begadish de baal harara. So we end up saying actually the owner of the coal and the pita is the same as the owner of the stack. It's all in the same field. And so here's the case. My dog went into your field. And in your field, you have a stack of grain. You also have some pita that's cooking on coals. My dog goes and takes the pita with the coal attached to it, moves it to the grain that's nearby on the other side of your own field, and eats the pita and drops the coal. And so it's all happening in your property, and that's the reason that I am responsible. It is, in fact, in Reshut HaNizak. Now that we learned that the responsibility for shen only applies in the Reshut HaNizak, in the field of the landowner, we can use that information to resolve a question that we had in general. Tifshot defi para kachasar hanizak dame, dei kachasar hamazik dame, lemale mai ba'e riftach befuma de chalbai. We can derive from this that the mouth of a cow is like the courtyard of the injured party. In other words, if my cow go and eats something in your field, so the mouth of my cow is considered part of your field. It's still on your field. Since my whole cow is on your field, the mouth of my cow is not a separate domain, and so anything in its mouth that it's eating is still considered not its own domain, my domain, but rather is still part of your field, even though it's in my cow's mouth. Now, how can we know this? How can we derive this? Because think about the other way around. If you say that when my cow is on your field, or let's go back to the dog example, my dog going into your field and eating some bread. If you would say that my dog on your field, anything in its mouth is my domain, because it's in my dog's mouth. If you would say that, then when my dog is eating your bread, your pita bread, I can say to you, what is your bread doing in the mouth of my dog? What is your bread doing in the mouth of my dog? That would be the same as you coming onto my property and putting bread on my property, and then my dog eats it on my property. I am not responsible for shen, right? Because I would say, in that case, why'd you put the bread on my property? If you come and put a basket of bread on my property and my animals eat it, I'm not responsible. Why'd you put it on my property? And so if we would consider the mouth of my animal to be my domain, so then I would not be responsible for my dog eating your bread. Therefore, we can conclude that when my dog is on your property, anything in its mouth is also considered to be on your property, and that's why I'm liable to shen. Good. Now, let's back up. What's the question that we are resolving now? Because we never heard of this question. So here's the background. Dibaya lehu. It was once asked. Pi para kachasad nizak tameh or kachasad mazik tameh. This was a question that was raised in the Bet Midrash. Is the mouth of my cow like your field, that if my cow eats something of yours, or is it considered like my field because it's my cow and it's in its mouth? Good. Now that was the general question, and now we can have a resolution. Now we ask about this question, like, isn't it simple? V'i amart kachasad mazik tameh shen dechayev rachamana hechi mashkachat la. If you say that on the one side that the mouth of my animal is like my property, well then when would I ever be liable for shen? Because shen, that's the definition of shen, is I'm eating my cow, my animal is eating something and has to be on your property. But if you say that my animal's mouth is like my property, then it doesn't matter. Wherever my animal goes and eats something, by eating, by definition, it's in its mouth. And therefore, if being in its mouth is my property, then there's no case where I would possibly be liable for shen. Okay, good question. But we have an answer. Amar Rav Mari bered Rav Kahana, kegon shenit hakecha bekotel lehanaata vetinefa perot lehanaata. In fact, there are cases, because remember, shen doesn't mean only literally my animal eating, but rather the definition of shen is any case where my animal does something in a normal way, it's doing normal behavior, and it's receiving benefit, it's receiving pleasure. So if my animal is rubbing up against a wall, your wall, because it wants to scratch its back, and it broke the wall, or it wants to roll around in produce, in your produce. Not eating it, it's just having fun rolling around in your apples. And it ruins them thereby. That is also, that's a category of shen. So you'd have a really interesting conclusion that shen, according to this opinion, would not be liable if it was literally eating in something in its mouth, because my animal's mouth is like my property, and therefore that's the shut hamazik, and I'm not liable. So if my animal actually eats something with its mouth, it's not liable. Shen only applies if it's doing damage for which it gets pleasure, but not in its mouth. Okay, but still, that's an answer. It could be there is liability for shen. Now we question this. Would this really be? Would this fit into the category of shen? Matkif la mor zutra v'haba'ina kasher yeva'ir hagalal ad tumo veleka. Back in the first perek, we said what's the derivation of shen, and we brought this pasuk from Melachim, says as a tooth consumes until it's all gone. So that means it has to be, in order to be liable for shen, it has to be that's completely destroyed. Like when you eat something, right, it's completely gone. And in this case, if it just broke a wall, well, the wall's not completely gone. It's just, fell down. So the stones are still there, pick it up. And if it rolled around in some fruit, but the fruit's still there, it's just a little smashed, but it's not like it's totally gone. So really that would not fit into the category of shen. Ravina amar de shaf salme, Rav Asher amar de pasoe. And so we revise the answer and say it's talking about not that the wall fell down, but rather the wall had some beautiful paintings on it. And my animal, by rubbing up against it, completely destroyed the paintings, not even anything left. And that would be a case of it's getting pleasure getting pleasure. It's a normal thing for it to do, to scratch its back against a wall, and it is in fact completely destroyed. Or if it smashes produce so much that it's completely gone, and there's nothing left. So these would be cases. So therefore, yes, it is possible to conceive of cases that will be liable to shen that do not involve something that's in its mouth. Okay, so now we have the question open. Let's try to figure it out. Is the mouth of my animal like my property or like your property? Tashema. Shisa bo et hakeleb, shisa bo et hanachash patur. Man patur, mishase patur, vechaya baal keleb. ויאמרת כחסד המזיק טמא, למלא מי באי ידך בפומי דכלבי. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin that says, if someone incites a dog to go and bite a victim, or someone incites a snake, not his dog, not his snake, someone else's, to go and bite someone and causes damage, he is not liable. We ask, who is not liable? Oh, we're talking about the inciter is not liable because the inciter only caused the damage indirectly. He didn't do anything. He just, was encouraging the dog, go bite him, but that does not impose liability. So we can infer from that the owner of the dog or of the snake is liable. He had to make sure, safeguard his dog or his snake to make sure it would not cause someone damage. Now, we can use this to resolve the question, because if you say that the mouth of my dog is like my own domain, then I can say to you, the victim, why'd you put your hand in the mouth of my dog? This is kind of like, when two brothers are fighting and one punches the other, and the parent comes and says, why'd you punch your brother? And says, no, I didn't. I held out my fist and he smashed his head into my fist. Right? I'm not liable. So, but this would be logically the conclusion. If in fact my dog's mouth is my property, then it would be the same as if you trespassed onto my field and my dog came and bit you. I am not liable because I would say, what are you doing in my property? And the same thing here. Even no matter where it is. Even if it's technically in your field, but once your hand is in the mouth of my dog, even though my dog ran and bit it and grabbed you and grabbed your hand and put it in its mouth, nevertheless it's still in my dog's mouth, and therefore it's my property, and I would not be liable. So here we can prove that this option is not correct. We answer in two ways. Ema patur af mishasev ibaitema tapekel inibe v'sartem. No, maybe you have to understand this, that not only the inciter is not liable, you have to read it to say the inciter is also not liable, and therefore the dog owner is also not liable. Right? Neither of them are liable. The inciter because it's only indirect, and in fact, this logic is true that the dog owner is not liable for any damage that happens inside its mouth, because inside the mouth of my dog is my property. And yes, that would be a correct conclusion, and we can read this Mishnah in that way. Or we can answer that, in fact, my dog is liable in this case, but that's only because it's a case where it extended its teeth and scratched the victim outside of its mouth. Its teeth can stick out outside of its the domain of its mouth and cause damage. Even according to this, indeed, if it bit you in its mouth, then I would not be liable. And when the Mishnah says liable, it's only a case where it extended its teeth outwards. Anyway, we can explain this Mishnah according to both opinions, and so this is not a question. So we'll try again. Tashema hishich bo et hanachash. Rabbi Yehuda mechayev chachamim potrim. The continuation of that Mishnah says that if I caused a snake to bite you, not that I incited it by doing some charm, but rather I held on to a snake and I attached it to your skin, and then it bit the person and killed him. So this is a machloket. Rabbi Yehuda says, I am hayav, and the Chamim say, I am not liable. So let's see. Amarav Achabat Yaakov. So he explained the machloket. What's the reason? Kitishim seloma ledibre Rabbi Yehuda eres nachash ben shinav hu omed lefichach makish besaif Venachash patur. So if you look into it, you'll find that according to the Yehuda, they have a different understanding of where the venom of the snake comes from. According to the Yehuda, the venom of the snake is in the teeth itself, in its fangs. And therefore, when I go and take the snake and put it onto your skin, so automatically the venom is going to enter into your body. Basically, I'm killing you directly. It's the same as if I take a sword and cut you and cause you to die. That would be, I don't blame the sword for doing it, right? It's a weapon. The snake is also a weapon, and that's why the human that did this is liable. The snake is not liable. The snake was just being held, and it didn't do anything. It was not active at all. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda says that the person that attacks with the snake is liable because the venom is in his teeth, so it's like a sword. According to Chachamim, the venom is not in the teeth itself, but rather the snake has to secrete it on its own. So therefore, when I take a snake and I put it on your skin, even if I put the teeth right into your skin, I am not liable. I'm only liable for making a little hole there in your skin. But the snake on its own is what decided evilly to secrete the venom into your skin, and therefore the snake gets killed biskila, like an ox that gores and kills someone. You stone the ox, so too a snake. And the person that was holding the snake and put it into your hand is not liable for murder. Okay, so that's the case. Now, here's the proof. Vi amart pi paraka hasar mazik tameh. If you say that the mouth of an animal is like the mouth of my animal is like my domain, so I could tell you, why'd you put your hand into the mouth of my snake? That is, according to Rabbanan, who says that the venom is in the mouth, is on the teeth of the snake. So even though I went and took the snake and put it right into your skin, but your skin here is in the mouth of my snake, and that's my property, and so it'll be the same as you coming onto my property, and then you get bitten by my snake on my property. I am not liable. Why is it? How come according to Rabbanan I am liable? And so we answer no. Le'inyan ketala la'amrinan. We do not apply this principle when it comes to the death penalty. If I do something that would make me liable to the death penalty, then I can't say, oh, it's because the mouth of my animal is my property. No. We only use this when it comes to payment, right? Damage that happens in the mouth of my animal, I don't have to pay. But damage that happens in the mouth of my animal that would cause me to have the death penalty I still get. And how do you know this? What's the source of that this is true? The Tanya. Hanichnas l'chasar ba'al habayit shelo b'rshut, ungaho shoro shel ba'al habayit, umet hashor b'skila u'ba'alim peturim min hakofer. We can learn this principle from the following baraita. If you enter into my field, right, you're the trespasser and I'm the field owner, and you trespass not without permission, and then my animal goes and gores Shorosha Balabait, right? My animal, that of the landowner, goes and gores you, the trespasser, and kills you. So the ox gets sikila because it went and killed someone. But the owner does not have to pay ransom. Normally, if my ox kills someone, I technically get the death penalty, but I can pay ransom instead. So it's in fact a payment. Now let's explain. Be'alim peturim min hakofer, my ta'ama, damar le birshuti, my ba'it. How come I don't have to pay that ransom? Because I can tell you, what were you doing in my property? You trespassed into my property, and now my animal killed you. That's your fault. You should have made sure not to go into my property. Shoronami le male, my ba'it birshuti. If so, how come my ox gets a death penalty? Can I also say, you shouldn't have been on my property, and so it's your fault that you got killed, and leave my ox alone? But we don't say that. Ela linyan ketala la amrinan. We say when it comes to death penalty, then we do not apply this rule, and if something happens on my property that for which I would be liable to death penalty, I am in fact responsible. Okay, this is very interesting halacha. It has to do with it relates to the stand your ground law, right? If so, someone comes into my property and they trip or get damaged or something, or my dog goes and bites them, I would not be liable for damages. But if someone comes into my property and then I shoot them, according to this, I would be still liable for murder. Of course, if they're coming with a weapon or if they're coming and threatening my life, then of course for self-defense. But if they're not threatening and they just wandered wrongly into the pulled up into the wrong driveway, I can't come out and shoot and kill them. If I can't say, well, it's my property, I can kill anyone who I want, and so that at least according to this sugya, one cannot do that. Okay, hanhu izeh debe tarbu dahavu mafsede le Rav Yosef. Amar le Abaye zil emalehu le maraihu delis ne'inhu. One time there were some goats that belonged to the Tarbu family goats, and they would all be walking around. They'd caused damage to Rav Yosef's property. They entered into his property and they caused damage. And Rav Yosef wanted to do something about this. So he went to Abaye and asked Abaye, would you do me a favor and go to the Tarbu people and ask them to keep their goats, sanua. Their goats should be more modest, meaning that he should build a fence around his goats so that they don't come and damage my property. This is not good. Amar le amai ezil dei azilna amar amri li ligdor mor gedera be'ad'eh. And Abaye said, why should I bother going? I know what they're going to say. They're going to say that Rav Yosef should put up a fence around his property. All right, we don't have to put up a fence around our goats. Our goats are free to walk around. If you don't like them, if you don't like the damage that they're doing to your field, you put a fence around your field. Okay, good. That's the story. Now we analyze it. Now, if he would put up a fence, and then how could you ever have liability for shen? Because we're saying basically that if he doesn't put up a fence, then it's his problem, right? You should put up a fence. I'm not, and so my goats, I'm not liable if my goats eat in your field because you should have put up a fence. And so therefore, if he does put up a fence, well then there's no way that my goats are going to get in. And so there's never a possibility of a case where anybody's animal would be liable for shen. We answer there is such a case. Keshehatra, could be that you put up a fence, but then my animal dug underneath the fence and snuck in. So you did a sufficient guarding of your field, but my animals got in anyway, and this is a normal thing for you can expect animals to do. So it's still normal behavior to go and eat in your property, and that's a case where I would be liable if my animal went and dug under your fence. Or you put up a fence properly, but then it fell down in the middle of the night when you're sleeping, and my animals then wandered in to the broken fence, and you're not expected to have to wake up in the middle of the night and check on your fence and fix it in the middle of the night. And so you did what you had to do to safeguard your field, and nevertheless my animals went in. And so those would be cases where I would be liable. And the last story, Machriz Rav Yosef, Item Rabba, Desalkin La'ila, Udenachtin Letata'a. So Rav Yosef or Rabba made the following announcement. People that make aliyah, meaning they moved from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, as well as those that descend from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, sages that went this way and that way, they all agree. This is an agreed upon law, both in Eretz Yisrael and in Bavel, that says, Hane'izeh de shuka de mafsedeh, matrinan bemaraihu, tere utlata zimnin. Isayit sayit, ve'ila amrin le tiv amascheta ve'kabel zuzach. When people bring their goats to the marketplace and they're hanging around, the people are waiting to sell their goats to the butcher, and so that the butcher would slaughter them, and then they could get a benefit from the meat. So they're waiting around for a good time to slaughter their goats. It might be now, it might be later in the afternoon. They want to see when there's a lot of customers. It might be tomorrow. But in the meantime, the goats are causing damage. So what do we do with these owners of these goats that are waiting around and causing damage? So all the rabbis agree that we give a warning to the owner 2 or 3 times and say, keep your goats safe and don't let them cause damage. Now, if the goat owners listen, then good. Then they'll listen and they keep it safe. But if they don't listen, then we tell the goat owners, go sit next to the butcher shop, and we force him to have it slaughtered right away. Even though right now the market might be low, there's not so many customers, and so take whatever money you get, and you're going to lose out and not get the maximum profit. That's a punishment that you get for not watching your goats, because you are responsible if your goats are otherwise just wandering around. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.